My name is Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. I look after communications and advocacy for the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, also formerly known as UNISDR, and it's really lovely to be with you this morning. I think it's sometimes very overwhelming to come to a conference like this, where there are thousands of people and thousands of ideas and lots of talking and lots of theory and lots of papers and reports. But the question remains for many of us, okay, the talking is great and the thinking is great, but how do we actually make the change that is necessary? And importantly, how do we make the change that is necessary within a very limited time frame before our planet collapses? I'd like to offer one solution this morning. You may have heard of them before. They are the Words into Action Guides. That is exactly what the name says, turning words and blah, blah, blah into action. Things that can happen practically, transparently, to turn big ideas into resilient and risk reduction activities on the ground around a range of topics. And it's my pleasure this morning to launch 3 new guides that have just been released by UNDRR and our partners who have collaborated on these with us this morning. They may just look like an ordinary report. They're printed on paper, lots of words, but actually the process in and of itself of developing this report is truly what we like to say is a crowdsourced project. We don't just take one person's ideas or one expert's opinion. We consult and consult and consult. We form groups of people who have sometimes widely ranging and diverse ideas on a topic and put them together, sometimes in the same room, sometimes online, over the course of about a year. And we use that year to thrash through the issues from one side of the globe to the other. Because what's working in Costa Rica may not necessarily work in Bangladesh, and what's working in Bangladesh might not necessarily work in Somalia. So we have a very intense collaborative writing process that really captures the best ideas and the best practice from around the globe and tries to filter that down, turn it into very practical how-to steps, put it in a book, whack it online that can be downloaded and then taken into national contexts. And sometimes we find that the content actually radically evolves as we're developing the guide. The idea that we started off with as UNDRR or one of our partners started off with can radically change over the course of writing. And I think that's a really, truly democratic process in action. And as UNDRR, we are essentially committed to that. Really, these guides are about putting common sense about a particular theme in one place. And importantly, they're about unpacking the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and saying, how do we achieve those 7 key priorities for action? A lot of what you'll read in these guides is not just what to do, but how to do it, around concrete ways that you can actually work together to enhance cooperation, because we know that cooperation between our organisations as the international community, whether this is at a local, a national, or a regional level, is a really proven way to materialise a more resilient future for ourselves. Last year, we launched 3 new guides. We dealt with the topic of man-made and technological hazards. We wanted to move away from this concept that natural hazards is really the focus of the Sendai Framework. Not at all. The Sendai Framework takes a wide lens angle to risk in all of its form, whether that's natural hazard or man-made hazard. We looked at national disaster risk assessments. How do countries actually assess their risk profile? And importantly, where do they put that information on the Sendai Monitor? And a wildly popular topic that we addressed last year was water-related disasters and transboundary cooperation. We know that the future for natural resources is fraught. And we know that boundaries and borders often get in the way of us sharing what nature has given us. So this guide on water-related disasters actually sets a how-to. How do you cooperate where potentially states make that more difficult to do so? And today I'm really pleased to launch 3 brand new guides. This one here is really in aid of achieving Target E. That is helping national and local governments to produce their DRR strategies. This is what countries signed up to when they agreed to the Sendai Framework. And we have a deadline of 2020 for every member state to write or draft a national DRR strategy. This is a key element of governments delivering on public good for their citizens. If you've wondered how to, if you're a government member, if you've wondered how to get that process started, this is a really hands-on guide that will work you through that process. It's available in print and online, and I'll tell you where to find them at the end. The second guide that we're launching today is around local disaster risk reduction and resilience strategies. So looking at the national and looking at the local and exploring how we mesh those two concepts together. And we really hope that the local resilience strategies guide will help people in communities on the ground understand how they link their local activities up to national frameworks. We know that the creation of local solutions is where the action really takes place. And the third guide that we're launching today, in partnership with the Platform for Disaster Displacement, Norwegian Refugee Council, IDMC, and sponsored by various governments, is on the issue of our times, if I can say that. It's around displacement. And it tackles the complex and often heartbreaking realities of displacement as a result of disaster. Importantly, it moves the dialogue from looking at disaster, at displacement as a consequence of risk, and puts displacement at the head of risk. It allows us to deal with the beginning, the middle, and the end of displacement. And given the scale of disaster displacement and its humanitarian consequences, we know that effective disaster risk reduction intertwining with the displacement sector is critical to prevent individuals and communities who are already vulnerable becoming more vulnerable. I wanted to ask one of our key collaborators this morning, Nina. Do you want to join me up here? Maybe not, but a little choice. Nina Viekeland is from the Norwegian Refugee Council, and I wanted to ask her a couple of questions, not just about the guide itself, but about the process of developing words interaction. Because as UNDRR, what we're saying this morning is we are committed long-term to these guides, and we'd love your ideas and your collaboration on the ones that we work on for over the next 2 years. Nina, you've been through the process with us of developing a words interaction guide, and I'll get onto that later, but I know you're from the Norwegian Refugee Council, and clearly the word refugee is in your title, so clearly you are concerned around displacement. But there are so many topical issues of merit at the moment: climate change, gendered issues, inclusivity. Why displacement? Why was this so critical to you?
I think for those of us who are behind this guide, displacement is part of forced migration. And as you said, this is one of the big topics in our time. Last week, a report was released. In 144 countries in the world, people are displaced because of the effects of disasters. And we talk about more people than displaced by conflict and violence. But of course, numbers is not just numbers. These are people.
Yeah.
And as you said, risk, how do we deal with risk, and how can we, by including thinking around disaster displacement into DRR work, we can avoid these numbers just going completely crazy. We can prevent disaster displacement, and it's being done, but we can do even more. And as Steph said, with Target E coming up next year, we thought we really need to make sure that when governments and others are working on the strategies, how do you include not just gender, age, all those important issues, but also displacement and disaster displacement. So this guide is really to make sure that that is one of many topics. So it's not more important or less important than others, it's just part of the many. So we're trying to put that little piece into the big puzzle.
Thank you. A critical element of DRR overall. And when you're thinking about, now that this is printed, it's being disseminated, who do you have in mind around who should use it and how? How should they use it?
First of all, this is paper book. Maybe look nice, but hopefully the content is nice too. So states, governments, disaster risk responders, but these are not only the governments, these are also civil society, think tanks, so the whole society, we need to use this. This way this guide is built up, it links very closely to the Sendai Framework, so it should be easy to kind of have the Sendai Framework and then how to include this. We also, in the process with this, we know that usually you need to walk and talk with people to do this. So already in some countries we are able to work together with civil society and governments to do work on this. Concretely in Nepal this is happening. We have very good plans with South Africa. We're doing things in the Andean countries, but also other countries we're talking. And how do we do it? This is kind of your recipe book. But first you need to have an idea, what do I want to cook? And for that we have also made a checklist. So those people who are working on the strategies, they can look at this checklist. Okay, have I done this? If I haven't, look here. And also what we're really working closely with the UNDR to do is that those ways of doing this we can pick from different countries and put on Prevention Web so it is accessible to all others. We have one wish we want to do in the autumn, and that's to make this into an app. So it's not just paper, but something you have in your pocket.
Wonderful. That's really exciting. Any advice that you'd give to people who are thinking, actually, that sounds like a great idea. I have a burning topic, and I know there's a lot of theory, and I know that we could use some really practical how-to action on this. What's the process been like for you? Any trips or tricks?
I think we had a very, very good starting point because, as you said in the beginning, there's something called a platform on disaster displacement, which is a process where states are leading this and said disaster displacement is something that's happening and we need to deal with. And what we've seen as the way that the states have been able to move with this, things are actually happening. We got disaster displacement and human mobility into the Sendai Framework. It came up in Paris around the climate change. It is into a lot of the other policy processes, global compact of migration, etc. So it's in there. So we had the advantage that we had a community that was wide, states, civil society, NGOs, and also the UN together. So that was a bit easier, I think, to start. But what we really wanted to make sure is that it's not just about the experts and those technical experts. So we made sure to go to all the regional platforms, talk with people there, work together with organizations and governments in different countries. So this is really, hopefully, not just a few, but many who contributed to. And this is just the beginning. Now we really need to use it. So anyone who's eager to try to see how can I, me, us take it forward, you find it on Prevention Web, but also contact us if you need help to how to build it into training, build it into things you're doing. We're not wanting to put up a new whole system on disaster displacement, but really integrate it to everything that's already ongoing.
Nina, thank you very much. And we really look forward to the stories from you, from the field, about how this is being used and how useful it is. Thank you very much. You may have noticed this morning that, in fact, the Words into Action guides look very different from what they have in the past. And this is really UNDRR recommitting to this series, to this work stream, and to bring the presentation in line with the quality of the content. And importantly for us, this is not the end of the road. I think often in organisations we think, oh my goodness, thank goodness that's done. We've done the report, finished. But in fact, that's where the work starts, isn't it? Once the report is written, what happens next is the critical part of it. And you'll see from UNDRR and our partners a very pragmatic stream of work opening up where we say, how are we disseminating? How are we tracking it? How are we making sure that we're collecting what's happening when this goes into the field? What bits are working? What isn't working? And what are the success stories that we can share from that? You can find all of these guides. We're committed to reducing paper. So you can find all of these guides online at Prevention Web. I'm just interested, how many people have heard about Prevention Web? That's fantastic. How many people knew that it's associated with UNDRR? Warming my heart. Prevention Web is really an online library, if you like, full of knowledge resources around anything to do with disaster risk reduction and risk reduction more generally, and increasingly so we are responding to the need for more resources around building resilience. So if there's ever anything you want to know about any topic that's raising its head in this world of risk reduction, Prevention Web is where to go, and you can find all of the Words into Action guidelines online. What topics will we tackle next? Well, that's up to you. I'm just going to ask Dave, who's going to hate me for doing this, but quickly step into the limelight for a moment, Dave. This is Dave, and Dave is part of our team at UNDRR, and Dave looks after Words into Action. So this is a gentleman you need to come and see, or myself after this. We're really wide open for topic suggestions. Risk has traditionally been, and disaster risk in particular, has been very technically focused. But we know that in an increasingly interconnected and globalised world, we cannot afford to have a siloed approach to risk. We must have a wide angle lens perspective, as I said in opening. And that means we need to open our eyes to the other topics, the emerging topics around emerging risks, and interact with those themes. So if you have any good ideas, you're very welcome to come and talk to us, and we can discuss how we take that further. Let me finish here. It's been a delight to be here this morning. We have a few copies floating around. If you can't get your hands on a paper copy, please go online to Prevention Web, catch Dave and I afterwards, and enjoy the rest of the global platform. Thank you.